Okay. Are we ready?
Ready.
We're back with our next episode in Genesis 12. This is the second part of Genesis 12. And this one is quite interesting.
Yeah, I have a feeling.
Yeah. This is coming off of a story of God blessing Abram. And I mean, God is speaking really, really well and really highly of him. And so it's interesting to see how often we'll see, and this is kind of the start of this, but we'll see a lot of times in the biblical narrative, there are a lot of moments where God will create covenants with people. Yeah. And then the next story right after, they really mess up. They break the covenant. They do something bad.
That's a bummer.
Yeah. And we saw this in the story of Noah, right? How God creates a covenant with Noah. And then right afterwards, Noah just completely biffs it, and he creates this vineyard, and he's another drunk, naked guy in a vineyard in a garden. You're like, oh man, that reminds me of someone else. But you're like, oh, like it's literally right after. And so we see this actually happen again with Abram. It's coming off of this blessing that God is proclaiming over him.
Not the drunk vineyard part, but
not the drunk vineyard naked part, but the like messing up literally right after. And I think the biblical authors want to put this right after so that you can see like, okay, they're going to set you up. They're going to set this person up to look really good. Yeah. And then they're just going to tear him down.
It's a contrast.
Yeah. And especially you look at for Abram, it's all about family, right? It's all about, you're going to have a great nation. It's going to come out of your family. And we're seeing here that this time that he really messes up has to do with family, and it has to do with how he treats his own family.
Thanks.
And so we're going to kind of work through this piece by piece here as we kind of go through. And so to start off, Matthew, could you read, let's see here. Let's do 1 through
10. 10 through.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, not 1. Well, 1 0.
1 dot. 0.
Yeah, let's just do let's just do the whole thing. Let's just go for it.
Yeah, all right.
I feel like to break it up would not do it justice and to see the whole
I like your spirit.
Arc of the story. So
we'll probably come back to it too.
So let's do 10 through 20. That's what we're going through here today.
Nice even numbers. Let's go.
Take us away.
All right. This is Abram and Sarai in Egypt. Now there was a famine in the land, so Abram went down to Egypt to sojourn there, for the famine was severe in the land. When he was about to enter Egypt, he said to Sarai, his wife, I know that you are a woman beautiful in appearance, and when the Egyptians see you, they will say, this is his wife. Then they will kill me, but they will let you live. Say, you are my sister, and it may go well with me because of you, and that my life may be spared for your sake. When Abram entered Egypt, the Egyptians saw that the woman was very beautiful. And when the princes of Pharaoh saw her, they praised her to Pharaoh. And the woman was taken into Pharaoh's house. And for her sake, he dealt well with Abram. And he had sheep, oxen, male donkeys, male servants, female donkeys, and camels. But the Lord afflicted Pharaoh and his house with great plagues because of Sarai, Abram's wife. So Pharaoh called to Abram and said, what is this you have done to me? Why did you not tell me that she was your wife? Why did you say, she is my sister, so that I took her for my wife? Now then, here is your wife. Take her and go. And Pharaoh gave men orders concerning him, that they sent him away with his wife and all that he had.
Wow.
Man, Abram, come on, buddy.
Like, dude.
Come on.
Like you had it. And of course you didn't have it for very long.
Got a beautiful wife. You got to look after her. You got to protect her. You got to be truthful in the way you speak. What is he doing?
Yeah, what is he doing? So instantly we see there's a famine in the land.
Yeah.
And this is the land, right?
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, we see it back in the last section, God promises them land.
Mm-hmm.
This doesn't mean it's always going to be easy.
Mm-mm.
But there's this famine in the land. And so where do they go? They go down to Egypt.
Mm-hmm.
And it's kind of interesting. One of my favorite books is the Book of Jonah. I don't know. I just really love it. It's really great. And
It's short. It's easy to read.
yeah, but it's so dense.
Yeah.
And one of the things that you see is they use the word down in the book to show Jonah's trying to get away from God. And so it says, you know, he goes down to Joppa. He goes down into the ship. He goes down into a deep sleep. And so it's kind of interesting to see here how it says Abram goes down to Egypt. And this doesn't mean that every time you see the word down that it means this.
Yeah. But
it is kind of, you're looking at like, okay, well, what kind of situation is he getting himself into? And it's pretty negative,
Yikes.
you know?
Yeah.
And so you can kind of connect that a little bit with him going down in this downward trajectory that he is on. And it's, I don't know, it's kind of cool to just see.
Something's about to go down.
Something is about to go down. And it's definitely going to happen.
Yikes.
And so we see there's this famine in the land. So they go down to Egypt. Famines are actually going to happen a few more times in the book of Genesis. And we'll see, we're going to talk about this a little bit this episode, how it happens at the end of Genesis as well. And it's a really big tie-in to the Exodus story.
Yeah. How would you define a famine if you weren't reading the Bible?
Oh, well,
I feel like that's a good Bible word that maybe gets overlooked sometimes.
Sure.
Maybe.
Barrenness.
Barrenness. Yeah. Oh, interesting.
Yeah, you know, where the land isn't producing and they are forced to look elsewhere.
Well played. I like that.
Yeah. Well,
I'll
we'll
take
call
that.
back from last episode, I guess. Yeah. So we see that the famine, it'll show up a few more times. We're definitely going to talk about that. So
cool.
Stay tuned. But we see this is where it gets really interesting. We're seeing some Genesis 3 language here, where Abram says to his wife, Sarai, he says, "I know that you are a woman beautiful in appearance." And you're like,
Oh, that sounds like a tree.
Something looks good in appearance, and it's Sarai, and it's also
something that might be desirable.
That fruit.
Something you want to take.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Yeah, and so
interesting.
I think this is absolutely a callback to that whole idea of seeing that something was good, seeing that it was desirable, and then taking it. We see that, you know, it's almost like you could say Sarai was a delight to the eyes.
It's also interesting to see how when that thing was taken, it resulted in a negative consequence for Pharaoh and for Abram as well.
Yeah. Well, actually, you can kind of see here, Abram gets out pretty well.
He doesn't die. So yeah, that could actually be
we'll see how
favorable.
God blesses him even though he is not following God by doing this.
He's going down.
God is still choosing to bless him, which is kind of crazy.
Yeah.
But, you know, you're seeing Sarai, she is beautiful in appearance. And when the Egyptians see you, they're going to say, this is his wife. And so they're going to want to kill me. So he's like, well, what if we did this? I have an idea. What if I basically disowned you as my wife and said that we are siblings instead? Because then they're not going to kill me.
I would never want to be siblings with my wife.
Yeah. But what is this saying? This is saying that Abram is now, he's disowning his wife. And he is ready and willing to give her up to be married to someone else. And so this is why we see the word like his wife. We see that phrase show up constantly in this passage. It shows up like 6 times.
Yeah.
So like verse 11, Sarai, his wife. In verse 12, this is his wife. We see in verse 17, we get these plagues because of Sarai, Abram's wife. Why did you not tell me that she was your wife? Now then, here is your wife. And then in the last verse, and Pharaoh gave men orders concerning him. They sent him away with his wife. And so you're seeing how like there's this huge focus on the fact that they're married, but it seems like Abram doesn't really have this focus.
Yeah.
And Abram's just more than okay to just give it up. Because he's just like, yeah, I want to stay safe. And so what am I going to do? I am just going to disown the fact that she is my wife.
Yeah.
And I am just going to keep myself safe. And so he literally gives her up to be married to the Pharaoh. And yeah, it's kind of
my mind goes back. I just want to touch on this briefly to Genesis 2.
Okay.
And it seems with the emphasis on wife and the emphasis on how self-centered Abram is acting,
Yeah.
that it is almost in a direct way going against what God even says.
Yeah.
A man and a woman should be. I think of Genesis 2:24. Therefore a man shall leave his father and his mother and hold fast to his wife, and they shall become one flesh. And it seems like in this, not actually a divorce, but you see a divorce of that one flesh saying, hey,
Totally.
You act as your own entity to save your skin, and I'll act as my own entity to save my skin. And in addition to that, this is all coming from the genius mind of Abram rather than just listening to what God
totally
has already told people what marriage should look like.
Absolutely. Yeah, this is not the how-to that you should be focusing on.
No.
Right? And it's interesting because Abram's whole promise is about family. And what does Abram instantly go against?
Give you a horrible
His
example
family.
for family.
Right? And so it's like, this is, the biblical authors are toying with this idea because they're like, man, like Abram's not supposed to be an example here. This is a prime example of a time where just because you read in the Bible doesn't mean it's what you should do.
Yeah.
Because you see, like in the last section, God is going to bless him and his family. And he's promising a great nation. And then here, he just throws that away.
Wow.
And we see this happen multiple times in Abram's story, where he is just so willing to just totally not focus on his family. We see actually almost an exact replay of this story in Genesis 20. And we also see this when Abram goes and basically cheats on his wife to continue their family line because they don't trust God with their servant Hagar.
Wow.
And so you think that with this one person having 3 stories that come to my head, at least, there's probably other undertones that we see in other events. Like these stories are giving focus that this person who's supposed to be the family man
Totally unfaithful.
is pretty unfaithful.
Wow.
Yeah. And they give a prime example of it, literally right here. And so you can see the continuation of these Genesis 3 undertones with the Egyptians saw that the woman was very beautiful. And when the princes of Pharaoh saw her, they praised her to Pharaoh. And then the woman was taken into Pharaoh's household. And so there's the seeing that it was good, and then there's the taking, which is like, they're just giving this to you, you know. This is a prime example of like, what does sin look like? It looks like this. Like it looks like Abram giving up his own wife to be married to someone else so that he can feel safe.
Wow.
And you're like, oh, like that's just icky.
Yeah. Feel it in your bone.
Yeah, totally.
Skin crawls.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you know, and actually this is really, and we talked about this, but Abram actually gets like a pretty good benefit from this. It says, and for her sake, he dealt with Abram. And he had sheep and oxen and male donkeys and male servants, female donkeys and camels. And so Abram like gets all this good stuff out of this. And then when he gets sent away, at the end, it says they sent him away with his wife and all that they had, which means he kept the stuff.
Wow, that's crazy.
And so now there's like Abram leaving with all kinds of stuff, which is kind of a little bit of a callback to the last section where Abram leaves with a bunch more stuff than he probably was supposed to. and you're seeing that, man, he's really benefiting from moments where he really shouldn't be.
Yeah. So that's building to God's character.
Yeah, right? Where
God's allowing that.
God's continuing to be faithful in moments where, like, Abram is really not being faithful.
Wow.
And so,
yeah, I didn't realize that the first time where he got all of the animals and
he just gets them and then he leaves with them. You're like, okay, cool, wow, good for him, I guess. But also, his track record doesn't look very good right now, considering the first story he's really involved in is negative.
Is this where Hagar comes from? Is it when it says female servants? I don't know. Do you think that? I don't know either, but that would be really interesting.
That would be interesting to look into.
Could you imagine
That's a great question
that would carry down the line of having the servant? I mean, I'm injecting, but that would be really wild if this. Yeah. Because he didn't leave, as we saw earlier in Genesis, he didn't leave with any servants.
I mean, honestly, that would be I would love to stamp my name on that claim.
Yeah.
And saying that Hagar is part of this deal.
That would just be so twisted to then have a child.
Sure.
Because that's like a mental callback to that point in that life of like, hey, Abram, remember that time you gave up your wife to the Pharaoh?
And then did it again?
And then you got free stuff from him?
Yeah.
And then you're unfaithful to your wife again? That's weird. That's wow.
I never even thought about that. Yeah.
Who knows?
Wow. Really? Wow. Yeah. Okay. We're also seeing, I saw this phrase and this is where, what we're trying to do here is get these light bulb moments.
Yeah.
So I saw this phrase in verse 18. It says, so Pharaoh called Abram and said, what is this that you have done to me? And I'm like, oh my gosh. Like that phrase, like that's in my head. I know that phrase. I've heard that phrase before. We actually see this phrase. We've seen it 2 other times in Genesis. This is the 3rd time we've seen this phrase. And this isn't like a simple common phrase. Like, then they went over here. Where you're like, oh my gosh, we've seen this multiple times. No, this is like a specific question. Yeah. What have you done?
So that's a very direct question.
Yeah.
Too.
And so this is the 3rd time we've seen this question. The first time was in Genesis 3. We see in verse 13.
This is the fall.
Yeah. Where it says, the Lord God said to the woman, what is this that you have done? And then we see this again in Genesis 4, verse 10, where he's talking to Cain after Cain killed Abel. And it says, and the Lord said, what have you done? So we're seeing this for the 3rd time. What is this that you have done to me? Where there's this extra weight almost. Because those are very big events.
Yeah.
These are very weighty events that are moments where people are going against God.
It's a betrayal moment too.
Totally.
Yeah.
Totally. And the other 2 times it's God saying it.
Yeah.
But now we see Pharaoh is saying this.
I think that's interesting how you have it set up, asked by God.
Yeah.
Because we really could have got an entirely different human response.
Totally.
From that question. But it's interesting to see how when Pharaoh asks that, he doesn't act in the human way.
Yeah.
Because I would think like if with that type of betrayal, I think humans would normally lash out, and they wouldn't just be like, just go, take the things I give you and go. I would imagine like almost a rage coming from that.
Well, especially someone who's that powerful. Would you imagine he would just kill Abram?
Yeah.
That's a very big possibility.
Yeah.
If I was Pharaoh, I'd probably do that.
I was thinking the same thing.
Well, I mean, if Abram is already afraid he's going to get killed just by being married to her.
Yeah.
Imagine being married to her and then lying and saying she's your sister and then giving her up to be married and then being outed that, oh, actually, you know what? They were married the whole time.
You know what's crazy though?
Like it's so much extra, and then Pharaoh's just actually like has a lot of grace with them and is like, just go.
I feel like this is actually a perfect representation of sin though. Sometimes we can be convinced that we're doing like something totally good. Like, oh yeah, like this sin, this feels right. It's totally natural. This is good. Yeah. And then you look back at it and you're like, wow, I had literally nothing right about that. And that's what happens here with Abram.
Yeah.
Because he's like, oh, I'll protect you. We'll just go in on our own sides.
Totally.
And, you know, he didn't even get Pharaoh's response right. Pharaoh didn't even kill him after he found out the truth.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
Yeah. Yeah. And somehow it still ends up well for him.
Yeah. God's grace.
Yeah, God's grace. Common grace right there.
Because God made a promise.
Yeah. Yeah. The last thing I want to look at here is this whole idea it's glued to Genesis 3, but it's also glued to the Exodus story where I'm seeing, okay, so there's a famine. People go to Egypt because
there's Pharaoh.
They go there, they have interactions, they do these things, and then we see there are specific interactions with Pharaoh where we can almost tie Abram and Moses a little bit together, where they're both interacting with Pharaoh in this way. Then we see, Pharaoh, his eyes are opened to the reality at hand because of plagues. And you're like, oh, yeah, that's totally Exodus, you know? The Prince of Egypt movie is just like playing my mind, you know?
I have that song stuck in my head now.
Yeah. And so we see there are these plagues that are happening to Pharaoh, and you're like, okay, that's very Exodus. Yeah. And then what does it end with? Take everything and go. Just go. You know? And the Israelites take all their stuff. In this case, Abram takes all of his stuff that he got from Egypt, and he goes. And it's really interesting to see how this 10 verses here are a microcosm of like a half a book, you know, and you're seeing how just here in this little area, I mean, sure, it's not like completely exact, but it's really close. And there's actually a lot of commentaries that go like verse by verse and really look at them right next to each other and show like, oh man, these are actually really, really, really close. And so this is just part of, you know, me not being a PhD holder. But even as I'm looking at this, I'm like, man, like, yeah, there really are a lot of connections here.
Well, I mean, you could also take it one step further. And if we're comparing Abram to Moses, they were both richly blessed, I guess you could say, by material gifts of what Pharaoh had. Like Moses was brought up in that royalty, and Abram wasn't, but he had all of the benefits of it: the sheep, the ox, the male donkeys, the servants.
In the same way that Joseph, when he came from his land, because of I mean, of course, he didn't come because of the famine, but
famine came afterward.
Yeah, but I mean, he came and he reaped the benefits in the end. I mean, it took a little bit to get there, but he definitely did, and so
wow.
Yeah, and so we see that this story, it's its own thing, but it's taken things from all different areas, and it's trying to present this core idea of like, well, what does it look like to follow God, and what does it look like to not follow God? And here's a really blatant way of what it looks like to not follow God, specifically for Abram, because he has a specific call, but yet he chooses not to follow it, even like you said, out of his seemingly good ambitions of like, well, we're gonna both be safe, but in the end, that's not trusting God.
This is a tangent, but I think often what it must have been like in those times, because do we know if they had any scrolls of like the stories of Noah or Adam and Eve? It just seems such a far cry of anything that we can comprehend. I wonder if Abram actually knew how horrible like he was off with doing what he did to his wife.
Yeah. Well,
because for us, we can just be like,
Yeah.
oh, yeah, let's flip back to Genesis chapter 2. And see, God
Yeah,
says
yeah.
right here, this is what
Yeah,
you're
yeah.
supposed to do. But
totally.
I don't know. I feel like those things are written on the hearts of man as well.
Yeah.
We know what's wrong.
Yeah. Totally.
Yeah.
And well, and God gives this voice of reason to Pharaoh.
Yeah.
Like, what have you done? Like, why did you say she was your sister? Well, this is your wife, you know? And so he gives this voice of reason to Pharaoh to almost, I'm saying this like very lightly, to play a little bit of a God role in this scenario. Where he,
Well,
obviously, like, Pharaoh isn't, I'm not saying that Pharaoh is being God here, but he's like almost playing the role of what God would play, like he has in the past stories, right?
Mm-hmm.
Especially with where this phrase has shown up previously, where he's like, he's the one being wronged, and he's being the voice of reason in this event of being wronged.
Well, I think maybe it's meant to show how when enacting in sin, you can also wrong other humans in the process. You're wronging God always.
Yeah.
But you can have collateral damage with that selfish act of sin.
And no matter what worldly blessings, quote unquote blessings, you might see, ultimately that has no effect on whether your heart is in a place of following God or not following God.
Yeah.
And there's no physical indicators of this blessing that we see in the first part of Genesis 12, right?
Yeah.
Where obviously there is the like making a great nation,
Mm-hmm.
but besides that, it's focused on the heart.
Mm-hmm.
It's focused on the people and who they are and how they act. And it's not, oh, they have all this money, they have all these sheep and ox and male donkeys and male servants and female servants, and go down the line. Because like that came blatantly after him sinning.
Yeah.
But yet he was, by what the world would see, he was blessed.
Mm.
And so you kind of see that there, which is interesting.
Yeah.
So
rich.
it is. It's very rich. And we're, in a sense, just getting started with this second part of Genesis. And we're going to see just how, as the story slows down and we look at one person and slowly see him pass it off to the next person, that we're seeing these themes continually, and we're seeing them continue to come up, even though we're seeing a little bit of a narrative shift over the last 2 episodes. So
I think this is going to be a lot of fun.
it will be. It will be
through.
a lot of fun.
I mean, so far, just from what we've read through in this first chapter,
It's been great.
yeah, it's really, really cool.
Yeah.
And yeah, I'm looking forward to it.
There you go.
Yeah.
So that is our episode this week, and we'll just keep going.
We'll see you next time.